Well, it seemed like a good idea at the time. Want to spend the night in a really haunted house? It was Fastidious Ted who said that to me, his rather less fastidious friend. Call me Will, short for Wilbur. Yeah. What, I said. You mean like one of those places decorated like for Halloween? No, this place is supposed to be really haunted. There have been numerous reports of paranormal and poltergeist activity. I don't believe in ghosts, I said. No? No, I said firmly. If it was possible to come back from the dead, there'd be a million guys like me coming back to haunt people they hated. You wouldn't be able to move around for ghosts. But when you die, you move to a higher spiritual plane, Ted answered primly. Yeah. Right. Still, I had nothing going on that night, so Ted and I went to visit a haunted house. It was actually a haunted B&B. As befits a haunted house, there was a lot of old Victorian furniture, upholstered in maroon and other dark shades, and walls covered with wallpaper of similar hue, all augmented by wood paneling, blackened with age. Yeah. Even worse, they served sherry before dinner. Yeah, sherry. Not even Amontillado. Well, at least the dinner was good. There were 4 other guests, a very, very middle-aged couple, and 2 attractive young women who only talked to each other, and definitely not to me. Our hosts were Lenore, a cadaverous brunette with alabaster white skin offset by her tight-fitting black dress, and George, I think that was his name, whose wide, staring eyes reminded me of the old horror movie actor George Zucco. That or Uncle Fester. When the meal was over, we went into the parlor, and the avuncular George gave us the history of the place. The Ambrose House, also known as the Yellow House, so called from the color of its distinctive brick exterior, was built in 1906 by Harry Ambrose, a wealthy businessman, as a home for his new bride, Evelyn. Sadly, Ambrose was shot dead on the front steps on August the 7th, 1908, while Evelyn watched in horror. It was her first visit to the house, and Harry had planned to carry her over the threshold. Harry's murderer was one Tyrus Vance, a rejected suitor of Evelyn's who had become obsessed with her. He was hanged for Harry's murder in 1909. Evelyn remarried, but her second husband, Roger Dixon, died on the Western Front in 1915, and Evelyn herself was carried off during the Spanish flu epidemic 3 years later, but not before giving birth to a son, Percy. Percy was raised in Ambrose House by an elderly maiden aunt. He was a strange, sickly, reclusive boy whose innate peculiarities were made worse by his aunt's obsessive and paranoid behavior. She believed that servants were always stealing from her, and was known to creep the darkened halls at night, trying to catch them in the act. Needless to say, good help, and soon any help, was impossible to find. As a result, the pair soon lived alone in increasing squalor, having less and less contact with the local people. Groceries were delivered to the house and left on the front steps, and that was as close as anyone got for many, many years. It was only when the delivery boy realized that the previous month's groceries were still on the steps that an investigation was made, and the bodies were found. The interior of the house was a shambles. Percy's body had been decomposing during the hottest months of the year and was now little more than a grease stain, while his aunt was only a skeleton. But those weren't the only bones they found. In fact, the basement was full of them, a regular ossuary. It wasn't known if Percy, for he was the one blamed, it wasn't known if Percy had dug them up from nearby cemeteries, or if he had done something worse. The area had experienced a number of mysterious disappearances, especially of young women, but ultimately no real connection between Percy and the missing people was ever established. Afterwards, the house devolved onto various relations, none of whom prospered under its roof. There were rumors of alcoholism, mental illness, divorce, even suicide. The evil or unlucky Ambrose House was eventually abandoned and fell into a state of decrepitude until Lenore and I bought it for a song, George concluded with a rather predatory smile. We had felt full and reasonably content, so the backstory of Ambrose House made an unpleasant dessert. I suppose a Ouija board session was inevitable. Of course, I got roped into playing, into participating, Ted being above such frivolity. 4 of us placed our fingers on the planchette. The attractive young women, and the gaunt, pale Lenore, and me. It was cool to be the only guy. I guess. Lenore asked the standard first question. Is there anyone there? The planchette moved immediately to yes. I don't know about the others, but I wasn't pushing it. Honest. Next question. Who are you? The planchette swung back and forth across the board and spelled out P-E-R-C-Y. Percy. Percy. Great. All the spirits in the hereafter, and we wind up with a serial killer? Naturally, Lenore had to ask Percy what he wanted, and the pointer spelled out K-I-L-L. And, stupidly, I had to ask, so, who do you want to kill, Perce? Yeah, you guessed it. The damn planchette moved to spell will, and you can bet I wasn't pushing it to do that. Who knows what would have happened, but at that precise moment, the parlor door opened on its own accord and slammed shut with a reverberating bang. We jumped to our feet, the Ouija board falling to the floor. We heard footsteps in the hall, footsteps approaching the door, and in a moment we heard someone knock. Come in, I said instinctively. George stiffened. You shouldn't have done that, he whispered. I was going to ask, why not? When the door swung open again, very slowly, very slowly. Both Lenore and George looked like they were about to wet themselves. Eyes wide, bright and starting to bug out, George announced in a quavering voice, "It is now midnight. I suggest, for everyone's safety, it's time to retire for the evening." And everybody dutifully trooped upstairs. I didn't even have time for another cheap sherry. But before we all entered our respective rooms, Lenore intoned, "You may become aware of activity outside your rooms, especially tonight, which seems charged with supernal energy. But under no circumstances leave your room before morning. More than your life may depend on it." And with that, she wished us good evening and pleasant dreams. Ted and I were sharing, as no one was supposed to be alone in this supposedly haunted house. Normally, I would have expected him to bitch about the food, the accommodation, the booze, the other guests. But tonight, he was strangely subdued. We lay down on our separate beds and waited for the games to begin. We figured they would stage some kind of ghostly performance. Except now, we weren't all that positive it would be a performance. So we lay there as the darkness took control, listening to nothing. Silence, profound, deathly silence, broken, after a time, by a barrage of raucous snores emanating from Ted. In fact, he was snoring at such a high decibel level, I thought the furniture would start rattling. "If that noise doesn't wake the dead, I don't know what would," I said to myself. I actually started to hope something would happen. Something would happen to either wake him up or drown him out. But I didn't have long to wait. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the opening of a door, then furtive footsteps, at first far away, but then drawing steadily closer as they moved up the stairs and into the hallway, when the sound was replaced with peals of maniacal, uproarious laughter. The ghost, the thing, Percy, whatever, whoever, came bounding down the hall, crashing down on the hardwood flooring as if leaping or dancing. And then it began pounding on the doors, and I heard screaming and the sound of splintering wood. The room began to fill with a fetid stench, far worse than Ted's usual flatulence. I tried calling out to Ted as he lay there, oblivious in spite of the horrible cacophony, only to find my voice wouldn't work. Then I attempted to get up, but found I couldn't move. And that's when the door swung open, wide open. A man stood in the doorway. He was short, slight, and balding, with an amused, or bemused, expression on his round, pale face. He looked like he would commence drooling if he opened his thin lips. But it was his wide, ice-blue eyes that arrested my attention. They were protuberant, hysterical, insane. His eyes had my attention. His eyes, and the long, sharp knife he held in his hands. "Who are you?" I said, telepathically, as I was still unable to speak. Percy, he answered. Percy. The sound had a weird, hollow quality, more like a recording than the sound of an actual voice. Why are you here? I said, again, telepathically. Kill, he said. Kill. And then he closed the door behind him. At first light, the others stepped into the hallway and began talking to each other with great animation, as if frantic for human contact. Most were wearing the same clothes from the previous evening, suggesting they had slept in them. Lenore and George soon put in their dark appearance. How did you guys do all that? Those special effects. They were amazing, the middle-aged man said. George looked at him sharply, coldly. Those were not special effects, he sniffed. Is everyone here? Lenore blurted. The group did a quick head count. Where are those two men? One of the young women said. George stepped forward and rapped on our door with his knuckles. Hello, he cried. Are you awake? Ted just lay there, not even snoring. He must have been really knocked out. I myself felt pretty groggy, not wanting to move. I tried to speak, but something seemed to be stuck in my throat. I heard a key turn in the lock. Then George was in the room and vomiting all over the rug. Oh my God! Look at the blood! Someone cried, while the middle-aged man bellowed, Their throats have been cut! And then I knew why Ted wasn't snoring, and why I felt like something was stuck in my throat. Percy had slit them. In fact, he was in the room, an arch smile cutting across his lopsided face. I realized no one else could see him or hear him when he said, Now do you believe in ghosts? Yes, I answered. I am one. Yes, Percy said. You are one. And ready for some fun? I'm ready, I said, smiling. Well as you can smile when your throat has been cut. And then I added, A haunting we will go, while Ted commenced some astral snoring, and the screaming began for real. The moral of the story? You don't believe in ghosts? Boo! Haunted, Part 2. I got the following text from my buddy John. Want to explore a haunted house? I said okay. It seemed like a good idea at the time. Call me Will. Short for, Will. My friends and I were into urban exploration, in particular any place that was supposed to be haunted and home to paranormal activity. So it was natural that we should explore the Yellow House. The Yellow House, so called from the color of its distinctive brick exterior, was built in 1906 by Harry Ambrose, a wealthy businessman who was shot dead on the front steps while his bride, Evelyn, watched in horror. It was her first visit to the house, and Harry had planned to carry her over the threshold. Kind of a threshold experience. Harry's murderer was a rejected suitor of Evelyn's. He was hanged. Evelyn remarried, but her second husband died on the Western Front And Evelyn herself was carried off during the Spanish flu epidemic. But not before giving birth to a son, Percy. Percy was raised in the Yellow House by an elderly maiden aunt. He was a strange, sickly, reclusive boy whose abnormality was made worse by his aunt's obsessive and paranoid behavior. She believed that servants were always stealing from her and was known to creep the darkened halls at night, trying to catch them in the act. Needless to say, good help, and soon any help, was impossible to find. The pair soon lived alone in increasing squalor, their groceries left for them on the front steps. And when the delivery boy realized that the previous month's groceries were still on the porch, an investigation was made, and the bodies were found. Percy's dead body had been decomposing during the hottest months of the year and was now little more than a grease stain, while his aunt was only a skeleton. Investigators found the basement full of bones, piles of them. Percy was blamed, but had he dug them up from the nearby cemetery? Or had Percy done something worse? The area had experienced a number of mysterious disappearances, especially of young women. Afterwards, the place went through various hands and eventually became a B&B. A B&B, a bed and breakfast. A bed and breakfast where 10 people were slaughtered in an especially sanguine, i.e. bloody manner, 7 years ago. 7 years had passed, but the killer, or killers, had never been found. Well, with a history like that, we naturally had to explore the place. We arrived at dusk. The Yellow House was all boarded up, and there were the obligatory no trespassing signs. But the board covering one of the back windows was loose, so we helped it to become looser and so entered. The place stank. Not just the usual reek of a closed-up house, the usual mustiness, but a heavy, rotten smell, which I automatically associated with blood. Although I couldn't have explained why that thought filled my head. We opened the back door wide to let in some fresh air, and we were glad it was a blustery evening, although it did make the old house creak something awful. We explored the first floor and ended up in a big room, which appeared to have been the dining room. This room, along with the entire floor, seemed to be full of ghosts. Ghosts, as in all the pieces of furniture, were covered by white sheets. The room featured a large dining table covered in dust, and that's where we set up the obligatory Ouija board and some candles. Some black candles. Satanic, eh? All we needed was a pentagram. I put my fingers on the planchette along with Anna and Kelly. Kelly, who was a take-charge girl, and asked the standard, "Is there anyone there?" The pointer moved automatically to yes. Well, I don't know about the girls, but I know I wasn't pushing a thing. Kelly's next question was, "Who are you?" The planchette swung back and forth across the board and spelled out W-I-L-L. Will! Me? Well, you can bet I wasn't pushing it to spell that. But Anna still burst out in unfriendly laughter. Unfriendly laughter. Will, you always have to be the center of attention, don't you? You know, sometimes I suspect Anna doesn't like me. I was too creeped out to be really annoyed with Anna. Still, I probably would have said something rude to her. But at that precise moment, we were startled by a loud crash from upstairs. "What the hell was that?" John said. As if any of us knew. We listened and heard feet walking across the floor above our heads. Then the sound of someone or something walking down the stairs. They weren't even trying to be quiet, which made it even more frightening. We were all out in the hallway by now, shining our flashlights at the foot of the stairs. A man appeared, a youngish man. I heard Anna hiss, "He looks just like Will." He did look like me, a slightly older me. And as he walked towards us, he smiled at us. He smiled. He smiled as well as you can when your throat has been cut. We didn't stick around to make his acquaintance. In fact, we split up and ran for our individual homes. So much for friends looking out for one another. At home, I just went to bed. There didn't seem any reason to stay up. Nothing as exciting as meeting a person with a cut throat was likely to happen the rest of the evening. But there, I was wrong. I was wrong. I woke up at 3 a.m. The dead zone in the watches of the night, the hour when people on the edge of death tend to slip away. A man stood at the foot of my bed, a man who looked a lot like me. He smiled at me. He smiled. He smiled as well as you can when your throat has been cut. He did not speak, but somehow I heard in my head his command, "Come with me. Come with me." And so I did. When Will was reported missing, his friends instituted a search. Of course, none of them told Will's parents or the authorities about the Yellow House. Nor did they go to search it themselves. Finally, after a few days, Anna got fed up. "I bet that idiot is hiding in the Yellow House. It's the kind of thing that immature fool would do." So Anna went to look for Will in the Yellow House. And she found him. And Anna is now in the psych ward. Technically, Will has never been found. Technically. But you may be able to find Will in the Yellow House, if you dare. The moral of the story? The haunted housing market these days is definitely cutthroat. Well, it seemed like a good idea at the time. I got a text from my buddy Alex. Want to add a haunted house to our list? The list were the items on a scavenger hunt we were organizing. And we had a haunted house we could add, a real haunted house we could visit. They could visit if they dared. Call me Luke, short for, Luke. The haunted house in question was known as the Yellow House, and it had a pretty lurid history. It was called the Yellow House due to the color of its distinctive brick exterior. It had been built in 1906 by Harry Ambrose, a wealthy businessman who was shot dead on the front steps while his bride, Evelyn, watched in horror. It was her first visit to the house, and Harry had planned to carry her over the threshold. Harry's murderer was a rejected suitor of Evelyn's. He was hanged. Evelyn remarried, but her second husband died on the Western Front, and Evelyn herself was carried off during the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918, but not before giving birth to a son, Percy. Percy was raised in the Yellow House by an elderly maiden aunt. He was a strange, sickly, reclusive boy whose abnormality was made worse by his aunt's obsessive and paranoid behavior. She believed that the servants were always stealing from her and was known to creep the darkened halls at night, trying to catch them in the act. Soon, good help, any help, was impossible to find. The pair soon lived alone, in increasing squalor, their groceries left for them on the front steps. And when the delivery boy realized that the previous month's groceries were still on the porch, an investigation was made, and the bodies were found. Percy's dead body had been decomposing during the hottest months of the year and was now little more than a grease stain, while his aunt was only a skeleton. Investigators found the basement full of bones, piles of them. Percy was blamed, but had he dug them up from the nearby cemetery? Or had he done something worse, way worse? The area had experienced a number of mysterious disappearances, especially of young women. Afterwards, the place went through various hands and eventually became a B&B. A B&B. A B&B where 10 people had been slaughtered in an especially sanguine manner, i.e., an especially bloody manner, 10 years ago. The killer, or killers, were never found. And then there was Will. Will, who was found dead in the Yellow House last year. His throat had been cut. Rumor had it that a young woman named Elena had killed him. She was now in the psycho ward, where she sat in a rubber room, screaming and pounding on the padded walls 24 hours a day. Well, with a history like that, we had to make them stop there. And then I decided to twist the knife in. I decided to twist the knife. We'll set up a Ouija board in there and make them ask if there's anyone there while you hide in the next room. You hide in the next room and start making noise. Spooky sounds like, I said with a laugh. Alex was laughing too, but his next question was serious. How are we going to get in there? The last time I looked, that place was all boarded up. Oh, they'll be able to get in. There was a loose board covering one of the back windows, so I loosened it a little bit more. And then, once inside, I unlocked the back door. They can get in. And so they did. They found the Ouija board and me, waiting for them in a big room, which must have been the dining room. How come you're here? Quinn demanded. Of course, it would be Quinn. How come you're here? Quinn demanded, as he pushed his glasses back up the bridge of his nose. I just wanted to make sure you guys showed up, I said coolly. We could have recorded it on our phones, Quinn said, truculently brandishing his device. I ignored him and said, Shall we begin? Once they all had their fingers on the planchette, I got Jordan to ask the standard first question. Is there anyone there? She said. Is there anyone there? I repeated loudly, which was Alex's cue to begin making noise, screaming and banging on walls. And so, right on cue, he unleashed a blood-curdling yell, which was followed by silence. Dead silence. Come on, Alex, I said to myself. Make some more noise. But nothing was happening. Everyone had jumped when Alex screamed, but they had kept their fingers glued to the planchette, which swung back and forth across the board, spelling out E-L-E-N-A. Elena, the psycho girl? And at that precise moment, a figure loomed up, blocking the door to the dining room. It was a young woman, about our age, a young woman who may have been pretty once, but now she was drooling, the black end of her tongue protruding from between her thin, cracked lips, while her hair was greasy and disheveled, the eyes wide and bloodshot. Her face was smeared with blood and gore, as was the white hospital gown she was wearing. We took all this in a split second, but our eyes were really riveted on the long, sharp knife she held in the white knuckles of her right hand, a knife which dripped blood, a knife which she slammed into the side of Quinn's torso. The big guy fell to the ground while the crazy woman, Elena, kept slashing at him. We all ran to Quinn's defense, right? Nope. As she fell to the ground with him, we all bolted for the open doorway. Hey, I didn't like the guy all that much. I ran into the hallway, only to hear Elena hot on our heels. But I knew the layout of the place, and the whereabouts of a closet to hide in. A closet with a lock. I cowered in there. Yeah, okay, I admit it. I'm a coward. I cowered, trying not to make a sound while listening to the screams and the running footsteps. After a while, everything was still as the grave. I peered through the keyhole out into the dimly lit hallway, and for an instant I had a nightmare vision of Elena sticking her knife blade into the keyhole and into my eye. But still I looked, and I couldn't see anything or anyone. I slowly pushed open the door, praying that it wouldn't creak, and stepped out into the hall and froze dead. Several figures stood in the hall. And no, none of them was Elena. One was short, slight, and balding, with a round, pale face and wide, ice blue eyes that were bulging, hysterical, insane. Standing with him were two men who might have been father and son. They looked so much alike. They even had the same gaping maws where their throats had been cut. I recognized the short man as I'd seen his photograph in an article about the Yellow House. It was Percy, the serial killer. And I knew the younger guy. His name was Will, and he had been murdered. All this was bad enough. But then I heard a strange, slithering noise, and I looked down. A number of body parts were crawling across the floor towards me. Hands, legs, a wobbling torso, a rolling head, all moving down the hallway towards me, leaving a trail of blood and slime. It was Alex. I turned to run and ran right into the sharp blade of Elena's long, sharp knife. I felt the cold blade sliding into my stomach's warm flesh, and after that, I didn't feel a thing. Nothing at all. The mysterious disappearance of Elena Novick from the provincial insane asylum is still shrouded in mystery. Elena, who was suspected of the murder of local student Will Jameson in the infamous Yellow House, had been confined in a special padded cell in the asylum's high security area. Recently, she had been screaming that 3 men had been standing outside her barred window, tormenting her and wanting her to come with them. But upon investigation, no trace of the men or of any unknown person could be found on the grounds of the asylum. Investigators have confirmed that the cell door was firmly locked and that the bars had not been tampered with. They have no explanation as to how Elena managed to escape. She is considered homicidal, homicidal and dangerous. Anyone with any information as to Elena Novick and her current whereabouts should call blah 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 blah. Well, I have a suggestion for them. They should check out the Yellow House. They'll find Elena there, along with creepy little Percy, and Big Will and Little Will, a real pair of cutthroat dudes, and Alex, and me. We're the ones crawling and wiggling across the floor. At least, what's left of us. You see, after meeting Elena, well, I kinda went all to pieces. The moral of the story: scavenger hunts can be fun till you meet the scavenger. If this is your first visit to my channel, please consider subscribing. My name is Warren, and I write and tell original ghost stories and original horror stories featuring such cryptids as the Night Floaters, werewolves, and the Black-Eyed Children. So again, please consider subscribing. Please help me to reach my goal of 2,021 subs in 2021. Till midnight. Cheers! Pictures used in today's video, courtesy of Pix Here, that's PX Here, while the music was The Dreadful, The Dread, by that wonderful patron of the internet, Kevin MacLeod. Wow, my voice is kind of rough today, so I hope this sounds okay. But I had time in the studio booked and, well, the show must go on.